I'm Jana. This is Breaking the News Plus. It has been 6 months since Operation Metro Surge descended upon the cities of Minneapolis, St. Paul, the surrounding suburbs, and really all of Minnesota. And tonight, CNN is releasing an investigation that is specifically about the 18 days between when Renee Good was shot and Alex Pretti was shot. Leading that investigation, Jake Tapper from CNN, and he joins us this afternoon. Hi, Jake.
Hi, thank you so much.
So what led CNN to put its resources into an investigation in that window of time in January between when Renee Good was shot and Alex Pretti was shot and killed?
Well, you know, and I know, and your viewers know that there is just so much that is happening during this tumultuous time that there can be an outrage one day, and then before the media can dive in and figure out what exactly just happened, there's another outrage. There have been just in the last few weeks 2 more shootings by Trump administration immigration agents on unarmed individuals in cars, one in Texas and one in Maine. So the policies continue. Critics say that they are over-aggressive, resulting in undocumented individuals who are innocent being shot and American citizens being shot, as we saw in Minnesota. So the idea was to go back and look at in depth what happened with the shooting of Renee Good on January 7th, what happened with the shooting of Alex Pretti on January 24th, why so many prosecutors from the U.S. Attorney's Office in Minnesota left the office in protest because they thought what they were being told to do by the Trump administration was immoral and unjust. And that resulted in this report.
And Jake, that's really what I want to zero in on, because here on the ground in Minnesota, we covered the shootings of Renee Good and Alex Pretti, but it was difficult to do a lot of follow-up on detail because the state of Minnesota was shut out of those investigations. They were shut out of the investigations really until about 3 weeks ago. So that part will pick up again. But I want to talk about what happened in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Minnesota from what you were able to find out in your reporting. We lost one of our biggest prosecutors here in the state, the lead prosecutor in the Feeding Our Future fraud scheme, which is kind of tangentially related to all of this, and others. So what happened inside that office? What did you find out in your report?
Well, the relationship between the U.S. Attorney's Office in Minnesota and the Trump administration had been pretty good throughout 2025. There was the fraud investigation, as you noted, which started under the Biden administration but continued under the Trump administration, and the Trump Justice Department was very happy with it. There were some really challenging investigations and cases having to do with the assassination of Melissa Hortman and her husband and the horrific Annunciation Catholic School shooting, but still the Trump Justice Department and the local prosecutors and local authorities were able to work well. But then came Operation Metro Surge. The first issue that happened was the immigration agents that would report AFOs, assaults on federal officers. They were complaining that protesters were attacking them. The man in charge of that, acting deputy in the office of the Minnesota U.S. Attorney's Office, a guy named Tom Calhoun Lopez, who spoke to us on camera for this report, he started noticing that he would take in these complaints. He would do the work to prosecute them. He had a supportive ideology when it came to law enforcement officers, thinking they had a difficult job. And then he would find out time and time again that these immigration agents, these federal authorities, were lying, that what they had been claiming was contradicted not only by witnesses, but often by video. So that was the first inkling something was going terribly wrong. Before the January 7th shooting of Renee Good, a number of prosecutors and others of other local authorities were meeting with federal authorities, and a Department of Homeland Security investigations agent said, someone is going to get killed. And this agent was referring to the fact that Border Patrol agents who don't have a lot of experience doing immigration enforcement in cities, and Greg Bavino, who had already been criticized as the commander-at-large of Border Patrol, had already been criticized for not only overly aggressive immigration enforcement tactics, but for lying under oath in Chicago, which a judge accused him of. They were worried that somebody was going to die, and somebody did die, January 7th, Renee Good. What followed was prosecutors trying to do a normal investigation of that shooting, working with the FBI and BCA, and the FBI and the Justice Department just shutting it down, saying they did not want to cooperate with local authorities, which is unusual. And also telling prosecutors in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Minnesota that they needed to claw back the search warrant for Renee Good's car. And instead of having it be predicated on an investigation into whether Renee Good's civil rights were violated, which is just standard operating procedure, change it to having it be investigating whether or not Renee Good was guilty of assaulting a federal officer in this context that she was somehow a domestic terrorist, which there's no evidence for. And the prosecutors didn't want to do that. First of all, it wasn't necessary. And second of all, they thought it was a corruption of how this kind of investigation goes on. In addition, the Justice Department was instructing them to also do at least some investigatory steps when it comes to Becca Good, the widow of Renee Good. And ultimately, when push came to shove, 5 prosecutors on January 13th just threw up their hands and said, I'm not going to do this. We're not going to do this anymore. And they resigned, including, as you noted, Joe Thompson, who had been acting U.S. attorney in 2025 and was the number 2 in the office under U.S. Attorney Rosen.
So that series of events after leading up to the shooting and killing of Renee Good, and then the instructions after, were kind of what tipped those prosecutors over the edge, is what you are hearing. I want you also, Jake, to talk about, if you can, there was a phone call with the U.S. Attorney's Office. Daniel Rosen was not present in that call, but that becomes important in this call. And I believe it was with Greg Bovino. Everybody in Minnesota
Greg
knows.
Bovino. Yeah, so as I mentioned, the prosecutors were not just automatically filing these charges against protesters, the assault on federal officer or AFO charges, because so many of these agents were lying. They would file them if there was evidence that the protester had actually assaulted the officers, but otherwise they didn't just take anybody's word for it anymore because there were so many immigration agents lying. Bovino was very frustrated with this. He called the U.S. Attorney's Office. He had been calling. He tried to reach the U.S. Attorney, Daniel Rosen, on Saturday, but as you know, Rosen is an observant Jew. He doesn't talk on the phone on the Sabbath. On that Tuesday, the 12th, Bovino reached others in the prosecutor's office and started just unloading on Minnesota protesters, calling them wackos, saying he was going to put down what was going on in the city. Very aggressive language that shocked the prosecutors. Also made a comment that a lot of the prosecutors interpreted as anti-Semitic, sneeringly referring to Rosen as one of the chosen people, and suggesting it was ridiculous he didn't take phone calls on the Sabbath because Orthodox Jews who are criminals commit crimes on the Sabbath. And so that really shocked a lot of the prosecutors. And one of them said, someone else is going to get killed. Didn't say that on the call, said that afterwards. And other prosecutors agreed. And sadly, that proved prophetic as well, because that was the 13th. 11 days later, Alex Pretti was killed. And I should note, while the Renee Good shooting, if there had been an actual investigation, it might have cleared the ICE agent, Jonathan Ross, or not. I don't know. Nobody knows. There was an argument to be made that he thought his life was in danger. Others thought that that was questionable, but either way, there should be an investigation one way or another. I couldn't find anybody who thought that the Pretti shooting was a quote-unquote good shooting. One prosecutor told me that it was a summary execution. It was that simple. That's the quote.
And so that's what you talked to this prosecutor to kind of shed some light on what's going on inside of our U.S. Attorney's Office during those 18 days. It is chaotic. I urge everybody watching this to read that report and watch Jake's reporting on this, because you will learn a lot. Even in Minnesota, things I didn't know are in this reporting. I want to know, let's take it to present day, because after Alex Pretti is killed, in the days and weeks after that, yes, it remained just a chaotic scene, but it started to lessen once Greg Bovino was shuffled out of town, and things started to dial down a little bit in terms of the public confrontation of everything. So here we are in July of 2026. Everything that you found and heard from that U.S. attorney or former U.S. attorney that you talked to, what is the Trump administration saying in response to what you have been able to find in your reporting? Are they admitting any wrongdoing, anything like that?
They are not admitting any wrongdoing. One person in the Trump administration tried to explain the false statements that now former Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, that she made about Renee Good and Alex Pretti, and also those Venezuelans who were shot on January 14th, I believe, by an ICE agent who has now been charged with not only assault on those gentlemen, but lying to law enforcement authorities. They blame Kristi Noem's false statements on immigration agents on the ground, filing and relaying false information up the chain of command. But regardless, there were so many falsehoods, so many lies told about the shootings of Renee Good and Alex Pretti. And why this is relevant is not just because the families of Renee Good and Alex Pretti have yet to get any justice. There has not been any investigation results. We don't even know if there is a federal investigation going on. And certainly 6 months later, that's a long time for charges to not have been brought or an explanation to not have been made about why charges haven't been brought against the Border Patrol and Customs and Border Protection agents who shot and killed Alex Pretti, who was not resisting arrest in any way and had already had his gun that he had a permit for taken away from him before one shot was fired. But also beyond that, these policies seem to be continuing. Overly aggressive immigration enforcement tactics against individuals who do not have any guns or weapons on them, resulting in deaths and, at the very least, contradictory statements about what happened by these immigration agents. And it is questionable in terms of what the policies continue to be. I mean, look, the Trump administration, President Trump got reelected because he promised that the border was shut down and that they would deport the worst of the worst. And I think most people probably would support, America is allowed to have closed borders and control who is in this country, just like any other Western civilization. And the worst of the worst should be in prison or deported. But that's not what these immigration policies are doing. We see people who are not the worst of the worst, who do not have criminal records, and in these cases are U.S. citizens shot and killed. And so there remain questions about what we saw happen in Minnesota and whether those policies continue today.
Yeah, and Jake, you and your team were able to come here with a fresh set of eyes who don't live here or in the community, and you got to take a fresh look. When you look back at what the work that you have produced and will air tonight, what do you think is the biggest tell? What's the through line? What should America take away from what you found? What's the biggest nugget there?
That there were hardcore, serious people in the prosecutor's office, in the U.S. Attorney's office in Minnesota. These are not that there's anything wrong with being a bleeding heart liberal, but these were not bleeding heart liberals who were sympathetic to criminals. These are prosecutors who want to protect the community, who want to protect Minneapolis, St. Paul, and the surrounding area. And they were shocked and offended and thought what the Trump administration was telling them to do was immoral and unethical. And for that reason, they resigned. And what they did was very brave. And the fact that this happened is something that we all need to pay attention to. You come from my wife was born in Isanti. I wrote a book about Jesse Ventura 100 years ago. Like, I have a connection to Minnesota. I know it is a wonderful state, and Minneapolis, St. Paul is an incredible city. And what the federal government subjected the people of Minneapolis, St. Paul to with Operation Metro Surge demands scrutiny and demands accountability.
Jake Tapper, we appreciate your reporting here from the Twin Cities and in Minnesota. Thank you for joining us on Breaking the News tonight.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. That's all for BTN Plus. We'll see you next time.